Oh, what's going on, guys? It's Horse Beef here, and I'm bringing you another tier list video. And today I'm going to be comparing every fighter in the UFC currently fighting, right? Currently active, with an undefeated record. I'm going to rank them according to how likely I think it is that they maintain that undefeated record and retire undefeated. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do. Not many have done it. Pretty much only like guys like Khabib that come to mind that have actually retired undefeated. And that's because a lot of guys don't really retire on top and when they're in their prime and allow their careers to decay a little bit. But these are guys, a lot of young fighters in here that have a lot of years to go and a lot of experience to gain, and I don't expect a lot of them will keep an undefeated record, but we are going to rank them based off of that metric for the most part. So let's just get into it, man. Tatsuo Tyra, who is fighting tonight, and you know, since I've watched back some of Tatsuo Tyra's clips, I actually realized that he isn't all jiu-jitsu. He does have some striking as well. He's decent, right? He is somewhat sharp. He's actually sharper than a good few of these guys on this list, but he is a flyweight. And flyweight is a killer's division. It really is, man. These guys are super, super well-rounded, especially at the top of flyweight. So I don't think that Tatsuo Tyra will keep that undefeated record for too much longer. But as far as compared to the rest of these guys, I'll actually put him... I'm going to put him here. I'm going to put him at B tier, like dead in the middle. But then depending on how he does against Alex Perez tonight may or may not change my opinion going forward. And then we get into Umar Nurmagomedov. Now, I'm not overly impressed with him. He does have pretty decent striking. I know he did knock out Barcelos with a very, very sharp left hook off a knee, which was, it was a fast, quick combination. I feel like a lot of expectations were built up for this guy. And then his last fight against that dude making his UFC debut and took the fight on short notice. He got hurt early on in the fight and then ended up laying and praying his way to victory. Unanimous decision, right? I don't know. I wasn't overly impressed, and now he's getting a fight against Corey Sandhagen, which I don't know if he's very deserving of, but screw it, he'll get that fight regardless because the UFC wants to push him. But I do think he's being pushed too hard, and I don't even think he'll get through Sandhagen. So based off of that and that alone, I can't put him on the same level as Tatsuo Tyra. I don't see a scenario where Umar Nurmagomedov retires undefeated. I don't know, unless the UFC really goes out of their way to match him up against the best stylistic matchups possible. I just don't see him getting through Sandhagen. I think Sandhagen has developed too well-rounded of a game, and ultimately, I think he'll take that O away from Umar Nurmagomedov. And then we get into Ilia Topuria. Now, I'm just going to put him straight at the top. Out of everyone on this list, I actually see him as the most likely to retire undefeated. His skill set is elite, some of the nastiest boxing in the game, serious knockout power with both hands, right? Left hook, right overhand, those nasty combinations, digs to the body really well, nice calf kicks, and elite ground game. I don't know. If he plays his cards right and takes out guys like Max Holloway, obviously Max Holloway would be the stylistic nightmare for him because he can eat a shot, has the greatest chin of all time, and could potentially piece him up on the feet. But if not for that Max Holloway fight, if he is able to get through him, I don't see anyone else at 145. But if he does take the risk and go up to 155 and try and go for that double champ status at some point, then I can see him getting knocked down and losing the O against someone like Islam Makhachev. But if he stays at 145, aside from Max Holloway, I don't see many fighters at that weight class really having much for Topuria. So he's S tier 100%. Then we get into Bo Nickal. Now, I wasn't impressed with his performance against Cody Brundage. Looked not that sharp on the feet and on the ground. Yeah, sure. Did he dominate? Yes, but was it dominant enough for me to put that much stock in him? Not really. So I'm just going to put him in C tier. I do imagine at some point he'll lose his... Like, I think about him going up against guys like Robert Whittaker, even dudes like Paulo Costa. I just don't see him getting through many who are currently within that top 10. Of course, same cases with Umar, right? He is a big hype job. The UFC wants to push him, so I can definitely see the UFC pushing him in a very specific way that's suitable to his skill set. You know what I mean? Like very, very favorable for him, which I see it happening, right? The UFC did that with Sean O'Malley and pretty much everyone else that they try and push down our throats, and I see the same thing happening with Bo. But if the UFC at some point gives him a tough matchup stylistically, which there are a lot at middleweight, I don't see Bo Nickal holding on to that O, and ultimately I can see him losing it in the next couple of fights. The way I see it, man, Shavkat Rakhmonov, I'm going to put him up here in S tier as well. Elite skill set, great striking, great grappling, 100% finish rate, and if he keeps that up, which I see him being very much able to do, right? Who's he matched up against next? JDM. That's a great fight. Honestly, now that I think about that fight against JDM, it's not exactly a stylistic nightmare for him because JDM is mostly just a boxer. But we saw against Gilbert Burns, that man can scramble. He can scramble with the best of them and has deadly, deadly striking. But I still do think Shavkat will get that one done. And when all is said and done, if Shavkat Rakhmonov is to retire undefeated, I don't know if I would honestly be that surprised. So I'm going to keep him up here at S tier with Ilia Topuria, Movsar Evloev. Excellent grappler, decent striker, although nothing really to write home about. Do I see him remaining undefeated? I think if he plays his fights very safe and doesn't get ahead of himself and try and strike, then you know what, I can see him beating a lot of guys at 145, but then I consider the fact that, one day he could get matched up with Topuria, and he doesn't have much to offer him on the feet, and when it comes to the ground game, I think Topuria can deal with him. I think you'd take him out, and 145 is just littered with very, very tough matchups for Evloev. So I think for that reason, I'll put him at A tier, honestly. I will put him at A tier, but I don't think that he'll keep that O for much longer, although it wouldn't surprise me if he is able to and maybe develop even better striking, because I do think his striking needs some work. I really do think it needs some work in order to put him at S tier, but he has been dominant thus far. Put up a great fight against Diego Lopez, and honestly, that win has aged beautifully since then. So there we go. Evloev, I'll put him at A tier. Tatiana Suarez, I mean, she'll have to fight first, right? Was she out for like 4 years? Does have some decent wins under her belt, like Jessica Andrade, and even has a win against Grasso as well. Ultimately, I don't see her getting through someone like Weili Zhang if she ever is to get to that title spot. Like, if she retires undefeated, it'll be because of injuries or some kind of health concerns that cause her to no longer be able to fight. I don't see her actually going through a full career and retiring undefeated. I just don't see the possibility of that personally. But I'll put her at D tier. I just don't see her being undefeated for much longer. If she fucking fights, right? She'll have to fight. Khamzat Chimaev. Now, I don't want to kick this man while he's down. I know he did pull out of the Robert Whittaker fight. He's constantly having health concerns. Maybe raises questions of whether he has some kind of an autoimmune disorder or something, man. So same case with Tatiana Suarez. If he is to retire undefeated, it'll be because he's no longer able to continue his career because of health complications. But personally, I think he's been exposed a good few times. Right, I would say he lost rounds 2 and 3 against Kamaru Usman, but probably got a 10-8. So that fight, the way I saw it, at best could have been a draw for Khamzat. And arguably, right, there is an argument that Gilbert Burns could have actually won that fight off the basis of landing big overhands in that third round and potentially doing more damage. Right, when I watched that fight back recently, I do actually rewatch that fight quite often because I love that fight. But I feel like Khamzat has exposed a lot of holes in his game, especially when it's when his endurance comes into play. His cardio isn't that great, and if you're able to survive that first round, which he is one of the most deadly guys within those first 5 minutes of a fight, he does fade, and it's consistent. He seems to always fade. It's not just like a one-time thing. No, he always fades if you get past that first round with him. But I will put him in B with Tatsuo Tyra, although I don't expect him to maintain that O as long as he continues to fight. I personally was going to pick Robert Whittaker to beat him. So there you go. Michael Morales, I don't know, he's good. He is a very good fighter, good striking, physical specimen as well. He is quite big for welterweight. He looks massive at that weight class. I just don't know if I see him keeping that O, although I will put him down here with Bo Nickal and Umar Nurmagomedov. Shara Bullet, I actually rate him quite heavily. The fact that he's a middleweight, I think, helps his case quite a bit, right? Because picture him against certain fighters like Sean Strickland, Paulo Costa, right? The top of middleweight is mostly populated by strikers, even like Nasruddin Imavov. I can see Shara Bullet beating a lot of them. So I'm going to put him at A tier because ultimately if he stays at middleweight, there aren't really nightmare matchups for him at the top of that division. So if the UFC, once again, with these fighters from the Caucasus that the UFC loves to push down our throats, if they play their cards right and match Shara Bullet up just right, I see him keeping that honestly, because he is nasty. Some of the best striking at middleweight. He might even prove himself to be the best striker at middleweight, man. He's lightning quick. And if he learns how to stuff a takedown, he will be an absolute problem for everyone at 185, the way I see it, man. Then we get Azamat Murzakanov. He's good. Great striker. He is kind of old, though. Weird build for 205. Do I see him keeping the Maybe, but at the same time, not really. So I'm going to put him at B tier. I do think that there are a lot of 205ers that just pose too many problems for him. Like, would you see him getting past somebody like an Alex Pereira? Even like a Jamal Hill would give him a ton of problems. Yuri Prohashka, probably not, right? So eventually, if he does make some kind of a title charge before retirement, I don't see it happening. But if he keeps fighting these mid-ranged fighters, then maybe he can do it. But at the end of the day, right, everyone should have title aspirations. And if you can see Murzakanov making a title run, then you can see a scenario where he loses that and I personally just don't think that he keeps it. Ian Machado Garry. Now, I'm not really sold on Gary's skill set. He is good. He is a very good striker, right? Good leg kicks, good counter puncher as well, great pull counters, like some of the best pull counters in the game, I would say. But I just think it comes down to him going up against a bad stylistic matchup at some point, and when he does, I don't see him keeping it, right? MVP right then and there. If MVP proves to be the better striker, then I can see him having a relatively easy time with Ian Garry. At the same time, I can see that fight being absolutely boring and either guy winning by some kind of a decision. Right? The UFC is trying to push both dudes, right? So who knows how that fight goes. Ultimately, I don't see Ian Garry really keeping that going forward. He just isn't elite enough. He doesn't have the X factor, in my personal opinion. So I'm going to put him at C tier. Muhammad Mokaev, I'll put him in the same spot. I really don't see Muhammad Mokaev maintaining the I know he has great jiu-jitsu, but he's just not elite enough everywhere. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying you have to be elite everywhere. Look at someone like Pantoja, sloppy, but he's a marauder and can take everything on the chin. Tatsuo Tyra, I think, has the edge over Mokaev when it comes to the striking, the overall MMA game. I think if they were to fight right now, I believe personally that Tatsuo Tyra would beat Muhammad Mokaev. I just feel like he's too one-dimensional, leans too heavily on his submission game. If he can't get the fight to the ground, he has problems, and had way too close of a fight with Alex Perez. I know Alex Perez has really, really come into his own recently and has been picking up some very nice results. But personally, from watching that fight live, I felt like Alex Perez deserved to maybe get that decision. So he arguably should not even have an as things stand. Should that be factored in? No, because he technically did win that fight. But at flyweight, you can't really be one-dimensional and go very far. So... But you know, at his age, at the same time, he could develop an elite striking game because he's only 23 years old. He's at the age where you can develop rapidly. So I could be wrong, but as things stand right now, I'm going to put Muhammad Mokaev in C tier. And then we have to get into Farid Basharat. Good striking, good overall game. I actually rate him. I do rate him, but he fights at Bantamweight. And you do have to factor in the weight class that they fight in. And I don't know if I see him getting through a lot of those top guys at Bantamweight. It's going to be tough, man. Imagine he gets matched up with a Peter Yan at some point in his career. We all know he's getting sent to the Shadow Realm. Even like a Song Yadong, Chito Vera. It'll be tough. There are very, very tough matchups for someone like Basharat. So you know what? I don't know. I'm going to put him in B tier because I do rate him. I think he has a good, well-rounded game. Pretty solid striking. He's pretty sharp on the feet. So overall, I do think that he'll lose the at some point, but compared to the others, let's say he's about mid-tier in that regard. And then we get into Khizriev, who is a middleweight. Last time out, I believe the fight ended because of an illegal eye poke or an accidental eye poke. So the fight was scored no contest. Tons of canceled bouts on his record as well. Hasn't really proven himself all that much. But if you've watched the dude, you know that he is quite well-rounded, and he's from the Caucasus, so of course you would assume that he has great grappling, which he does. And he is pretty decent on the feet too. Ultimately, though, I do think that he's pretty bog standard when it comes to these Russian fighters. I don't see anything too special about him, like in someone like Shara Bullet, or absolute dominance like you see in somebody like a Movsar Evloev. I don't know, at middleweight, like I say, there are some great sprawling brawlers at the top of that division. So at some point, if he does make a title charge. I don't know if I see him getting through all those guys. Even someone like Aliskerov, who I think is more elite than Khizriev, in my opinion. Lerone Murphy, he beat my boy Edson Barbosa. Looked pretty good, man. Beat Barbosa up pretty bad for 5 rounds. Barbosa did have a few moments here and there, and Lerone Murphy, I think, showed, if nothing else, he showed extreme toughness. The man is extremely tough. Decent hands, a little bit sloppy and stiff on the feet. I don't consider him to be an elite striker or an elite MMA fighter in general, but he is quite well-rounded, and he is good. Although at 145, do you see Lerone Murphy keeping his O? In my opinion, I do not. Victoria Dudakova, she's pretty cute. I'm not going to lie. Russian girl. We're just going to put her at D tier because I can't be asked to educate myself on Dudakova. I do know a bit about her. I've seen her fight. At the end of the day, there's a big gap between these lower level ladies and the top level ladies. And at the end of the day, man, Shevchenko, Grasso, Weili Zhang, Yan Xiaonan, those girls, I think they've put such a wide gap between them and everyone else in their respective divisions. I just don't see many of these up and coming girls really challenging them too much. The way I see it, man. So Dudakova, she might be good. She might, make me eat my words here, but I'm putting her there. Fight me on that, I guess. If you're a big Dudakova fan, then feel free to let me know in the comments section. Clayton Carpenter. Now this dude looks like he has an excellent credit score, I must say. Although I look at him, I watch him fight. He hasn't proven himself too much, and I know the sample size within the UFC is quite small. So for that reason, I can't put him anywhere above D tier. I do think he's just too basic and rudimentary, and I think eventually, within the next couple of fights, my prediction is that he will taste defeat. He is one of these undefeated fighters who just hasn't fought many times, right? And he hasn't fought many times at the high level. Of course, he's impressed since making it to the UFC, but I think one Dana White Contender Series appearance and then one fight in the UFC, it's not enough to really judge him. But from what I've seen, his skill set is a bit basic, in my opinion. But of course, he's elite because he made it to the UFC and he's one of the best fighters in the world. Based off that alone, it's no sign of disrespect to say this, but I'm just comparing them to the others on this list. Rinya Nakamura. Now, I think this guy is good. He is very good, dynamite in those hands, and has wrestling pedigree. You know what? I like him. Although he is a bantamweight. For some reason, I look at Rinya Nakamura, and I think of all these Asian prospects that have come up recently, he might be my favorite. So I'm going to put him in A tier. I actually think there's a good chance that Rinya Nakamura could potentially become champion because, seriously, and as a lot of fighters do with that wrestling base, they generally are able to develop powerful striking, and he does have powerful striking. He isn't overall like a very crisp striker, but he is more sharp than you may give him credit for, honestly. If you watch him, he does throw a pretty good lead hook. He really does. And when he throws, he looks like he's trying to take your head off. And like I said, with that wrestling pedigree, he's well-rounded. He can mix it up. And I can see him beating a lot of guys and climbing that ladder relatively quickly at bantamweight. Unless, of course, he runs into Peter Yan, then he's finished. As we all know, it goes without saying. Rafael Estevam, I'm going to put him in D tier. I don't see him maintaining that O. He did have a close fight with Charles Johnson. Now, I know that's not the deciding factor. It shouldn't be the deciding factor, but I just don't consider Charles Johnson to be an elite fighter, and he was being walked down at some point by Charles Johnson, getting pieced up against the fence, and I think it was a bad look. And even if he is elite and improves and proves me wrong, which is very, very possible, the way I see it as things stand in this current point in time, I don't see Estevam keeping that O going forward. Josephine Knutson, good striker. Although, like I said when I was talking about Dudakova, these girls are just too elite when you get to the very top, and there's just such a wide gap. There's too much of a wide gap, and you might say this is sexism or whatnot, but I would disagree, man, because let's get into the next one. Talita Al-Ansar, I'm going to put her in the same spot. Don't know much about her, really, but based on what I've seen of her, I just don't see her getting through any of these top-ranked female fighters. I don't want to get into it much more. So we get into Marcos right here. Watched him fight recently against John Castaneda. Looked great in that fight. Did get hurt at the very end, but for the most part, he was relatively unscathed. Striking looked sharp, has power in those hands, and he's good. He is actually quite good, but once again, the issue is that he fights at bantamweight. and bantamweights are really good. Do I think he's as good as Javid Basharat? Maybe. He's on his level. But ultimately, I don't think he does anything too special. That's why we'll put him down here at C tier, because I can see him proving me wrong. I can see him improving and ultimately proving me wrong. Jean Matsumoto. Now, he's good. I actually rate him. His striking is very, very solid. He is good. Among all these Brazilian prospects, he might be one of my favorites and also one of the ones going under the radar the most. Yeah, choked out Dan Argueta last time out. Once again, only has one fight in the UFC and then one in the Contender Series. So very, very much untested. So I guess putting him all the way up here is a bit generous. Although when I just look at his skill set, I actually do rate him quite a bit. So I'm gonna keep him in B tier. I like Jean Matsumoto. Payton Talbott. Now I rate him quite a bit. He reminds me a lot of Sean O'Malley, not necessarily because they have the same striking style, but he does seem to have this factor about him. I don't know, this star factor, this power factor, this certain pedigree that it's hard to really put your finger on. But he looks really good, man. Against Cameron Simon, just pieced him up. Looked great. Looked unscathed by the end of it, and ultimately Cameron Simon could not do a single thing against him. You know, before his last two fights, Cameron Simon himself was considered to be one of these upcoming guys at bantamweight. So ultimately, Payton Talbott made him look like he didn't even deserve to be in there with him. For some reason, I do think that at his age, if he continues on like this, there is a scenario in my head where Payton Talbott gets that bantamweight strap, and maybe retires undefeated. He could become a star. He really, really can. I just can't convince myself to put him at S tier quite yet because he is relatively unproven at the highest level. I would say I'll reserve that for his next fight. If he can put on a similar performance against maybe a ranked opponent, then that for me would propel him to S tier the way I see it. But for now, Payton Talbott is at A tier. Then we get another man from the Caucasus region, Nurullo Aliev. There is a bit of hype around this guy. He is very, very young, so he could develop, as I keep saying, like these younger guys can easily surprise you because they can develop at a rapid rate. But he hasn't fought in like over a year at this point. Did have a pretty close fight with Rafael Alves. So at the end of the day, I do think he is one of these hype jobs from the Caucasus. I don't think he'll reach those same heights, but of course at his age, similar to someone like Muhammad Mokaev, can easily prove me wrong. So I'm going to put him right beside his boy Muhammad Mokaev. Fight me on that if you disagree. Hyun Sung Park. Now I rate him. I do rate him. Another Asian prospect from South Korea who's looked really sharp, and he is a finisher. So I have to give him points for that. Right? He's finished fights on the feet and on the ground. He's well-rounded. He is good. Although, like I say, untested. Although within the UFC, he actually does have more fights than a lot of these guys do. So at the end of the day, I'm going to put him in B tier because I'm not too sure. And he actually has been tested. So if I'm ranking some of these guys lower down on the list because they're untested, he actually has been tested to an extent. Although I have to factor in the flyweight factor, which is a very tough one to get by. So when I input that data in my noggin, I'm going to actually drop him down to C tier because at flyweight, yes, he could improve. He is young. I mean, he has a baby face. Really. Like he looks like he's about 10, but I'm not too sure that he'll keep that. Oh, I actually don't think he will. Haider Emil. If that's how you say it, that's how you say it. If it's not, then correct me in the comment section below. But I like Haider Emil, although I watch him fight, and I'm not overly impressed. Like I've said, very, very untested, and he is at 145. Like, think about it objectively. Do you see him getting through a lot of those top guys at 145? Me personally, I do not. So I'm going to put him at D tier. Andre Lima. Now, he's had an interesting career so far within the UFC. I believe he was bitten and got a DQ win, and then his last fight was a split decision against Mitch Raposo. So that, in and of itself, is just not a very good look. And for that reason, if you're having close fights like that against Mitch Raposo, like if you've been untested within the UFC, I'm looking for performances like a Payton Talbott, like a Nakamura. You know what I mean? If you've been untested against top contenders, at least clean out the lower end of the division at some point, right? At least make it look somewhat easy at the lower levels for me to have that confidence in you to rank you high up on the list like a Payton Talbott and a Nakamura. He just hasn't done that, so I'm going to put him in D tier. I can see him losing that O in his next fight or two, realistically. Rei Suraya, another Japanese prospect here. Ultimately, he is good, very dominant on the ground. He needs a finisher too, which I do respect. Although I just don't see anything overly special about his skill set. And we get another victim of just being a flyweight and having to compete with some of these top dudes, because I'm telling you, man, when it comes to the elite flyweights, they are the most elite fighters in the UFC, bar none. They are incredible. And I just don't see somebody like Soraya really maintaining that undefeated record as he climbs up that ladder. Mick Parkin, now he's from England, so I expect him to have some pretty hefty supporters, although he's a heavyweight. End of the day, he's a predominant grappler. He is mostly just a grappler. Striking is okay from what I've seen, but ultimately he's a heavyweight. He will get chinned at some point. I feel like it's inevitable, so I can't put him anywhere else but D tier. And then we get into the last fighter on this list, Barlow. Now Barlow is an undefeated welterweight. He is a finisher. He did knock out, I believe it was Josh Quinlan in his last fight. Is that a good win having the record? I mean, like, any finish is a good result, because like I said, man, at the lower ends of the division, you have to be finishing guys and making it look relatively easy for me to think that you'll maintain that at some point, right? He is dangerous. He is good on the feet. You know, I'm trying to be sparing with my placement at the very top, right? The middle, I think, is pretty reasonable, but when it comes to the top, like, I don't see him as a prospect on the same level as a Nakamura or a Talbott or a Shara Bullet or a Movsar Evloev. So ultimately, I will have to put him here, though. I will put him here because welterweight, I feel, is a bit dry at the moment. So if a prospect is going to make a run at the title in any division, why not at welterweight, right? So even though I do feel tempted to put him at D tier, ultimately I do like Barlow. I think he's good. I think he hits damn hard. That left hand is nasty, right? A lot of power behind it. And I can see him knocking out some dudes, climbing up that ladder at welterweight, and then eventually losing the O at some point, maybe towards like the middle range, top 15 to like top 8 area. I can see him making it to that point and then getting knocked down a few pegs. But ultimately, if Barlow is to keep that O and knock out some dudes, win that title, God, I mean, would I be surprised? Yes. But at the same time, I wouldn't be, because this is MMA, and any of these individuals can prove me wrong, and I expect every single one of them to. So this is no disrespect. If you disagree with my placement of some of these fighters on this list, then feel free to let me know in the comment section below exactly why you disagree. But you're entitled to your opinion, and so am I. Let me know in the comment section below if you enjoyed the video, and if you'd like me to post other tier lists going forward, and any ideas you might have, like always. If you'd like, leave a like on the video, subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.